No, there's great advice there. And thinking then about you mentioned the timed aspect. For both the verbal and numerical, does there tend to be, how long do the tests tend to be on average, and how many questions could you expect within that time period?
So they will range. The general thrust within the market has been to try and make tests that are shorter and shorter and shorter. This is mainly because the perception was that graduates rebel against being asked to sit long tests because it takes a lot of time, it's quite onerous. So the shortest ones nowadays get down to around about 7 minutes long. Wow. And really quite short and sharp. And you might get maybe 10 to 12 questions in that. So really short. The longer ones that are more like 25 minutes or so, and then you'll have about 30 questions in those. It's interesting actually. What test publishers are finding is that test takers are sometimes rebelling against these shorter tests because they feel it hasn't given them a chance to demonstrate their skills to its fullest. They feel that the timing element was too stressful, and actually they preferred the longer tests. So that we might see a passage back to the longer tests over time. But you're generally looking at around about a minute per question-ish.
Okay. And looking at the example then of, say, 25 minutes and 30 questions, what would be a pass mark, an expected pass mark for something like that?
Yeah. So if I go into the scoring a little bit, I mean, when we design these tests, we put in enough questions so that even the most intellectually able person shouldn't be sitting around twiddling their thumbs by the end of the time. So the first thing to say is, don't worry if you don't get to the end. That isn't a necessary requirement. The second thing is to say, all of the scores in the test, you will get a raw score in most cases, and we will compare this against a comparison group, so a norm group. And each organisation will have chosen a norm group that suits the requirements of the job. So if you're applying for a job in retail at the graduate level, there is very likely to be a retail graduate comparison group. What that does is it tells the recruiter for each score, or each score point you've got, what percentage of that comparison group that score would outperform. So let's say on a 25 question test, a score of 20 might have outperformed, let's say, 75% of that comparison group. If you used a different comparison group, then that percentage would shift, obviously. So if you're thinking, what would the pass mark be? We generally tend to talk about the pass marks in terms of the percentile that we would accept. And when you're sifting out large numbers at an early stage in the process, you tend to set that quite low. And by low, it's typically between the 20th percentile and the 50th percentile. So as long as you're performing better than around about half of the other graduates that are applying for these types of jobs, then you're likely to get through to the next stage. When you get to the later stages in the process, then that can be increased. It can be increased to even as high as like the 70th percentile. But that doesn't happen at the start. And part of the reason for that is that these tests aren't absolutely foolproof, so you need to leave in a little bit of a buffer room, and partly also because you do see greater adverse impact. So people from different groups, so whether that's ethnic or gender, tend to become more pronounced if you set those cut-offs too high. So companies tend to set them low.
Okay, and do they, when you're looking at the results, do you just look at solely the number of questions that have been answered correctly, or would they also look at the number of questions that people attempted? Because I know when I was doing it, it was, do you go for accuracy, or do you just go for, you've got 20% chance if there's 5 questions, do you just go for A, and see how you get on?
Yeah, that's a good question. What psychologists tend to do is to look at the raw score, so the number of questions that you got correct in isolation. However, accuracy can sometimes come into play when you're looking to distinguish between two very closely matched candidates. So if you have 2 candidates that both got 20 questions right, but one of them only attempted 20 and one of them attempted 30, then the person that got 100% of the questions they attempted correct could be seen as being the more accurate worker, the less likely to make mistakes. So that it might just tip over the balance. And some of the more modern psychometric tests do actually start norming your level of accuracy as well. So the employer will know not only how bright you are compared to other graduates, but also how accurate you are compared to other graduates. But that's relatively rarer. So typically it's the number correct. And that's why when we advise, is it better to just wild guess, and if they put A down, then my advice would be make an educated guess. So if you can narrow down your multiple choice options from 4 to 2, let's say, then I would say make a guess. If you really haven't got a clue, then responding in a near random manner will start to impact your accuracy, and that could hinder your chances.
Interesting. And think about the answers then. You've got 5 answers, one of which is right. Would you, as a test creator, try and create 4 other answers that are very similar to it and try and throw people off, or do you do it in more of a random manner?
We would always be devious where we have the chance. So we would never try and trip people up, I guess, unfairly, but we would want to make all of the answer options seem plausible. So in a numerical reasoning test, you might see a series of responses, but with a decimal plot point in a different place each time. That enables us to determine whether you've done the correct rounding in your estimation. What we wouldn't do is put a complete outlier. So let's say the answers to a numerical reasoning question wouldn't be £15, £16, £17, £342. That would just be too obviously wrong or odd, and therefore it wouldn't be adding much to our understanding if we were to ask that question, because it would be too easy to discount some of the options.
No, that makes sense. And yeah, as you're doing them, say for some of the percentage ones, if you do the percentage wrong, you might often find that the wrong answer is one of the options to easily pick you up. But then, as you said, as you practice, you quickly can spot the ones that are deliberately wrong.
That's right.
If you know what you're doing.
That's right.
Would you give any advice to people who might have learning difficulties, such as dyslexia, who might find these tests more challenging?
My advice would always be to let the recruiting organisation know. It will not harm your application, and they will either then make amendments or they will talk to the test publisher, who will be able to make amendments accordingly. The very best recruiters will actually ask you what kind of amendments you find most useful. So say, for example, with dyslexia, it's often a time increase that is important, and we can get a gauge on the typical percentage time increase that you might have had before. So they will ask you for your views. For things like let's say visual impairments, then we can provide the tests in different font sizes. We can also look at things like the colour to make sure that there aren't any colour interference going on. So there are a number of adaptations that can be made, and my key piece of advice would be to raise it and to ask them what their advice would be, because then they will make those changes accordingly.
No, that's great advice, and you should always, just let these employers know, because it's always going to help rather than hinder your application.
Yeah.